Is starting a podcast right for you? In this video, I'm going to share my experience having a podcast with over 160 episodes, what that was like, what are some of the pros and cons of doing so, share with you my experience. And I'm also going to share with you another option that might get you some of the same results as a podcast, especially if you're in the B2B space, and possibly do it faster. So, my name is Kevin Sanderson. I had a podcast. In fact, it's still available. I'm going to go and share my screen here. So, I have a podcast that, at least as of the time I record this in February 2026, it's still available. Although I'm paying, I think, $8 a month to keep it online with Libsyn, which I'll go over some of the statistics here in a moment. But basically, I got up to 160 episodes. Got a little bit of traction, more traction than a lot of other shows get, which I'll show you a little bit more about that. But basically, the gist of it was having a podcast was great because it was a way to reach out to people that I might not have been able to connect with otherwise. There's something that people find as a compliment if you say, "Hey, I have a podcast. Would you like to come on as a guest?" Very rarely do you get people to say no. I even had my congressman come on the show. And sometimes I would bring in people that weren't even in my niche, which was Amazon e-commerce space. I had, oddly enough, as a guest, Justin Guarini, who you might be saying, who's that? Maybe that name sounds familiar to you. He was the runner-up to Kelly Clarkson in the first season of American Idol. One of the most viewed episodes in TV history was the episode where he and Kelly went head to head, so to speak. Super nice guy. But if I just reached out to somebody like that and said, "Hey, would you set up a meeting with me and just talk about yourself?" They'd be like, "No." If you say, "Hey, I have a podcast. Would you like to come on?" It opens up a lot of doors. I had the former executive vice president of operations of Walt Disney World, someone who actually was fairly accessible for as big of a position as he had, which at one point in time you could kind of say he was my boss, but he was probably like 5-6 levels above me, because I used to work at Walt Disney World at the same time that he did. But it was a cool experience having him on and having a very down to earth conversation about business. So it did open up a lot of collaboration opportunities, but the downfall is it can take a while to get traction. So I don't have a lot of great statistics. I have the basic statistics that come with my basic plan. But basically, all time, I had 40,000, almost 41,000 downloads for 160 episodes. So you might be saying, well, what does that equate to? So let me bring up the old trusty calculator here. So if you took 40,997 episodes divided by downloads divided by episodes. Not every download is necessarily a listen, but it was 256 downloads per episode on average. And although I don't have the more granular data, I can tell you, you can see it started off slow and it did take some time to get some traction. So this was May of 2019 that I started. And then I stopped in December of 2022. In fact, I had one little month where I got a little bit of traction after that. And then it pretty much fell off a cliff. And a couple little, I have no idea why, maybe 1 or 2 people just downloaded all the episodes or something like that. Or somebody shared an old episode. Who knows sometimes. But basically, for the most part, it pretty much fell off a cliff. And I can tell you that if we were to look at this on a more month by month or quarterly basis, you would see spikes every Thursday because the podcast at the time came out on Thursdays. So if it's a Thursday podcast, that means most of the downloads would be pretty much I wouldn't say most of the downloads, the busiest day, and we'd have a spike on that Thursday. And then a little bit on Friday, and then it would kind of taper off. And then you just get like a trickle over time. And I also put that on my YouTube channel, which I would say I had, again, not putting a lot of effort into this YouTube channel. It's still up. In fact, the second to last video here on this YouTube channel, which is different than the one you're watching right now, was the episode where was the last episode. And then I put one other video up with someone else from a guest from the other topic I'll talk about. I put that one up and it's got a little bit of traction. But basically, for the most part, I would say while I was active, I was getting, which I know this one was 259, 301, 139 views, 204, 139. I would have said about 100 views on average would be on YouTube, in addition to at the time, I would have said 200-ish downloads. So basically, every time I published an episode, once I got good traction, it was about 300 people would see or listen, I should say. And some of it over time would be like this one here has 2,300. This is an outlier. Some of them, are at like 66, or some of them are at like 95. Some of them are right at 100. And some, like, if they look different, it's because it wasn't a podcast episode. I would just kind of like put podcasts amongst other videos. So like the most popular videos on the channel, you have to go a little ways before you find a podcast episode. In fact, that one I pointed out to you that had 2,300 episodes is pretty far down the list of most popular videos on the channel. And it took me a while to get traction on the channel as well. So no matter what you're doing, whether it's YouTube, whether it's podcast, just know it's going to take you some time. And you got to be comfortable with the fact that initially it's a tough go. So one thing just to point out, which where was that statistic? It was, I apologize, I had it handy, but I think I moved my my scrolling here. But basically, there, as far as like the average podcast, as soon as I find it here, has 30 downloads. Oh, here we go. So, and this is first 7 days. Some of the numbers I were giving you is probably more like the first 30 days, but they're going to be in the ballpark of each other. I don't think the difference between 7 days and 30 days is all that much. 7 days and 3 years is going to have a big difference because you get that trickle effect that over time kind of adds up. But basically, the median podcast, so right in the middle, your average podcast gets 30 downloads an episode. And most of the ones underneath it are hardly any at all. And that was what it was when I first started. It was less than 30. I remember when I started getting around 30 downloads an episode, I kind of felt good about myself. And that was this time where it starts off really low. Like you see, May of 2019, the month I added it, I had 119 downloads. Now, keep in mind, I think I put out like 4 or 5 episodes. So I started off with like, I think 3 or 4 episodes, and I added a couple more before month end. And I was pushing it hard. I had a little bit of an email list to push it to. I was pushing it on social media. So, some of those are probably like, my mom type of downloads, as well as some other folks. And then over time, it did get traction. So that's where it gets more to like the top 25% is 114. So I was probably somewhere in the middle, probably let's say in the top 20%. And this is also podcasting listenership has grown somewhat. And so this is 2024 statistics. So I'm telling you about, I think I might've said 2023. It was December of 2022 was my last episode that I published. So I was probably 20-ish%, the top 20-ish%. And over time, more and more people have added podcasts. So like the year I started, according to this AI overview on Google, which is always correct. But I think this is accurate because I've done research on this before. And, just in talking to other podcasters, it's gotten harder to do an audio podcast because one of the downfalls I did not mention earlier is it is very hard to get seen. So you have to push it. So the best way to get more more listeners is to go on other shows and get more listeners, people that listen to similar podcasts to come on your podcast. Because at the end of the day, it's all about traffic and it's all about collaborations. So in 2020, there was over 1 million new podcasts. And I had heard a statistic like that there was like 4 times the number of new RSS feeds, which basically a podcast is an RSS feed, which the simplest way to explain it is just, the feed you're putting out to the internet and say, hey, new podcast available. Um, that that million new podcasts, not all of them are around anymore, but there was definitely a lot of people getting into it. And then we're adding, according to this, over 200,000 new shows a year. Now, a lot of these fall off, but there are currently 4.5 million shows available. And some of them are evergreen, and people might listen to shows from, 5-10 years ago if they're still relevant. But one statistic they put here is 44% of all podcasts end after 3 episodes. And I've heard the number is even higher if you say 10. So most podcasts don't make it to 10. So if you can at least give yourself the goal of 10, and that might seem like, I don't want it to sound bleak because there was a lot of positives I got out of it. But what I ended up finding was, for me, what was even better was to do virtual summits. So in 2020, when the lockdown, when a lot of other people were creating podcasts, I already had a podcast. So I started taking guests that I already knew, connections I knew, and then started reaching out to people I didn't know and inviting them on virtual summits on different topics like pay-per-click advertising for Amazon sellers, because everything I'm doing is B2B and business to business. And I was getting more traction that way because I could bring on a bunch of guests and get, 500-600 very niche people to sign up on my email list. So they're not just listeners who I have no idea who they are. They may one day get on my email list. I quickly grew my email list to several thousand people on my email list in the Amazon e-commerce space from doing virtual summits. I found virtual summits were a lot better of an option for me. And I would say for a lot of people, they get traction faster because you get your speakers to promote your virtual summit. So basically the way that works is, let's say you have a virtual summit and you bring on 15 to 20 speakers. Some people will do like 30. I would say do 15 to 20 is your goal. If you go to 25, it's not the end of the world, but the more speakers you add, just the more work it is. And sometimes there's the diminishing returns per speaker you add. So if you focus on, I'm going to find 15 to 20 very relevant speakers who potentially have lists, potentially have a social media following, or willing to share it out to their audiences. You're going to build your list faster and get traction faster. So it's almost like a surge of doing like a bunch of podcast recordings. Because if you do it the way I suggest, you record your speakers sessions that you're doing. So it's almost kind of like doing a podcast interview, except usually they come with like slide decks, or you could do it just as an interview. Either way is fine. But you get a whole lot done in a short period of time. You're going to get a lot more traction because it's harder to get people to promote a podcast episode and put as much oomph behind it than it is to say that they're as part of like a virtual summit, then they're really excited about it. So like, for example, I'll share my screen again. I've got 2 businesses that I operate virtual summits in. And so recently I did a virtual summit for marketing agency owners, and I had over 1,000 people show up. And I think maybe from my own list, because I have marketing agencies in the Amazon space that have been on my list from the other business, I got maybe 50 or 60 people to sign up through that. And then most of these just came from speakers, sharing it on LinkedIn, social media, Facebook, whatever. They shared it in a variety of different places or their email lists. And that brought a ton of people, ton of people. So over 1,000 people. And if you're doing more of a B2C type thing with, audiences that aren't B2B, oftentimes those numbers can be a lot higher. But I would say even if you did a virtual summit and you had 200 people to sign up, that's 200 new people on your email list who, if you have the right speakers, you have the right targeting, it could really help you out. So, and then here's another one, smaller, but still worthwhile. Not everything you see here is a summit, But this one here is 636. It's probably hard to see, but basically this one was about email list growth. So it was the list growth summit I hosted a while back. And this was free to sign up. So I got 600 people to sign up. Also made money off of people purchasing the recordings. So, between these, that's over $10,000 in revenue, front end revenue. And then people are on my list, become prospects to buy services that I offer. It opens up the door to collaborations. I was invited onto other people's podcasts as a result of doing these. So for a variety of reasons, I would say if you want something where you can promise yourself you're going to show up every week for a long period of time, and it might take a while, it might take you 6 to 12 months before you start seeing really any traction on a podcast. If that's something you're okay with, then I would say, maybe consider doing the podcast, because it's nice because you're showing up consistently. You can develop relationships with people because they're hearing your voice over time. Whereas if you want a quicker hit, so to speak, I would suggest maybe doing a virtual summit. Having had a podcast, which, especially for a B2B podcast in a niche, like it's not huge, it's not small, but the Amazon niche is not ginormous, if that's a real word. I would say I got decent traction out of that. But like if I went to a conference and I'm talking to somebody and they would say, "Oh, I know who you are," it was generally not from the podcast. It was from the virtual summit. They're like, "Oh yeah, I went to your summit. I saw whatever," and there's a lot of goodwill developed from the summit, probably more so than the podcast, which you would think the podcast would have done a lot of goodwill. But I tended to find, at least with the audience, the virtual summit audience was stickier, even though I wasn't doing virtual summits as often as I was doing podcasts. But maybe it was because it was like a big surge all at once of, 15 to 20. It's almost like having 15 to 20 episodes you put out in a short period of time. And so it's all about having the right mix of speakers if you do a virtual summit. And if you want to learn more about that, then actually down below, I will have a link to download the Grow Marketing Blueprints workbook, which is basically the reason I call it Grow Marketing framework, so to speak. I was looking for the word there, but basically you can generate leads using summits. You can relate to them using your emails, and then webinars to offer value, and then you win clients over time. And this particular model is what I would say you could do with virtual summits to not just get the front end benefit, but also to get over time benefit, which I know some people might be watching the same, but I came to this video to learn about podcasts. Well, I'm just presenting another option, which is similar in format to podcasts, but just is a little bit more work all at once, but could get you traction faster, in my experience. And so this back end funnel here with the emails and the webinars could be another way, kind of like what a podcast does, of staying in front of an audience. And just to kind of show you, actually here, it generated, and for one agency that I worked with, that number needs to be updated. It's closer to 90. It's actually a little over 99,000, not quite 100,000 in what's called MRR, which is monthly recurring revenue. So on an annualized basis, that's about 1.1, almost 1.2 million. And the asterisk there is that's what we can track, because that's using very specific calendars that people signed up to go to sales appointments and then become a client. Whereas not everybody who does this will actually go through the calendars we want. Oftentimes they sign up on their own. So if you're in the B2B space and you're interested in learning about this, I would definitely recommend signing up for the Grow Marketing Blueprint workbook. So you can either comment down below workbook, or I'll have a link to it as well. And then if you have any questions about podcasting, I'd be more than happy to give you my pros and cons or whatever. I mean, it was a good experience. I stuck around with it for 3.5 years. So it wasn't bad. I mean, if it was terrible. I wouldn't have done it for, more than 6 months. So it was definitely worth doing. But, looking back, I probably would do virtual summits more and then maybe add on a podcast later, because a podcast is not a bad thing to do, and they're relatively inexpensive. And they're, like I said, they're a great way to connect with people. And maybe that's something you could do. If you were going to do virtual summits, you could have your podcast be another way to stay top of mind in between. So just some thoughts to think about. So again, Kevin Sanderson from LGN Marketing here. And hopefully this video was of value to you. If it was, please click that like button and subscribe. Take care.